Today we're going to be bringing the pain with the special issue ammunition, as we're looking at a few ideas for competitive Deathwatch armies. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. So we've done quite a few videos on the Deathwatch Codex over the last few weeks, and I thought it was high time that we put things together a bit and come up with some actual Deathwatch army lists. I've tried to build a few different feeling lists that still revolve around a core of Deathwatch veterans toting the special issue ammo, hopefully aiming to pose at least somewhat of a challenge from a competitive standpoint on the tabletop. There's 3 lists to go through, so let's take a look at the first one now. So the first list that we're looking at is fairly simple and also fairly non-traditional from a Deathwatch standpoint. It most certainly is pure Deathwatch, but it also revolves mainly around 3 Repulsor Executioners to bring a bit of the anti-tank pain that Deathwatch aren't really famed for. These things are toughness 8 and already fairly hard to remove, particularly at long range, but we're going to be making use of the Dominus Aegis, the relic Deathwatch Storm Shield, that will be able to give them a 5+ invul save. We briefly were seeing Iron Hands Castles or Repulsor Executioners with 5+ invul saves from Phyros, and I don't think that this is quite as strong as that, to be honest, as you don't have quite the same synergies going on in Codex Deathwatch as you do in the wider Codex Space Marine arsenal, but I think it's at least an interesting idea. So at the core of the list we have 2 characters, the Watchmaster for 4 rerolls, and a Watch Captain who will be surrounded by the 3 Repulsor Executioners, laying down some heavy laser destroyer shots. The Watch Captain has a Storm Shield and Storm Bolter to bear the Dominus Aegis, and this will provide a 5+ invul save to everyone around him if he doesn't move in that turn. This does mean that if the opponent goes first, then the 5+ invul will not be up, so it could potentially be worth putting the Repulsor Executioners quite far back to start with to try and outrange enemy firepower, and then moving up into the buff range on the turn it activates. The Watchmaster will also provide them with nowhere to hide, so they'll be able to ignore cover with all their plethora of little anti-infantry shots, and they'll hover around as the main firebase, hopefully keeping the enemy ducking for cover. To fill out the battalion detachment, we have 4 kill teams, all made up of Deathwatch Primaris Intercessors. In each kill team there's 8 Intercessors, all armed with the auto bolt rifles, which works excellently with the special issue ammunition and tactical doctrine. One of them also having a Thunderhammer for some extra melee threat, and an Aggressor for a little bit of extra melee punch, and also allowing them to advance and shoot with no penalty. These guys can be a bit flexible as to whether or not they start on the board. It might be worth it against slower moving, more melee based armies, just so they can get more rounds of shooting in downrange, but I typically have anywhere between 1 and 3 of them deep striking, to bring all of that fairly close range fire up to the enemy battle line. Hopefully over the first turn or 2, the Repulsor Executioners can clear out the majority of big threatening enemy armor units, and when they're not under quite as much threat, they're free to move up out of that Dominus Aegis umbrella, and push up and start hunting enemy smaller units with their other guns. In terms of weaknesses, there really aren't all that many units in this list, which could make objective scoring a bit of a problem, and if there is an enemy army that has very long range anti-tank capacity, such as Eldar Flyers or something, then it could be an issue if we lose multiple Repulsor Executioners turn 1, which is very possible. We're also not enormously fast either. Once those kill teams have dropped in, they'll be moving quite slowly, and it could be hard to get to grips with a flighty enemy. On the plus side though, it has really quite decent anti-tank potential, loads of anti-infantry firepower, and also reasonably decent melee threat, with each of the strike teams being fairly proficient with a couple of power weapons. I know this isn't all that traditional, but I just thought it was an interesting synergy with the Dominus Aegis and the Repulsor Executioners, and it could certainly be possible to ally in a different anti-tank element for your Deathwatch from a different Space Marine Codex. For our second list today, we have an allied Deathwatch list, where we've basically gone for a 50-50 split of Deathwatch and Blood Angels allies. I think that Deathwatch and Blood Angels work pretty well together, to be honest. The Deathwatch have a decent amount of anti-infantry shredding ability, where the Dark Angels just have the raw close combat power to be able to just murderize any target they want and bring down the heavy targets that the Deathwatch might struggle against. They're also both good at deep striking and hitting very hard, which has a decent amount of synergy together. This one's roughly a 50-50 split, and the Deathwatch side has a Watchmaster and Watch Captain. The Watchmaster will be going in the 2 drop pods alongside the 2 9-man veteran teams, each with Storm Bolter and Storm Shield, and a Thunderhammer on the Sergeant instead of the Storm Shield. These guys will be able to drop in turn 1, and with the Watchmaster's 4 rerolls, which will be able to shred an enormous amount of infantry, hopefully clearing the way for any screens to allow our Blood Angels to drop in turn 2. To even add more punch to this Alpha Strike, we also have 10 veterans that will be starting on the board, and they'll be teleporting over to the Watch Captain with the jump pack via the Beacon Angelis. We'll start the watch captain fairly far forward, but screened, and we'll move and potentially advance, and then drop the veterans within 6 inches of him, hopefully also getting them within rapid fire range right from turn 1. We'll certainly attempt charges with anything that can on turn 1 as well, although it is a bit of a long shot with them all being 9-inch charges. But with a command reroll, you never know, we might make contact and get a few Thunderhammer hits to work on the enemy as well. Again, the Watchmaster has Lord of Hidden Knowledge for the command point farming, and the Watch Captain has Castellan of the Black Vault this time to give him an extra damage on that Thunderhammer for helping him deal with heavies in subsequent turns. From the Blood Angels side of things, we have Chief Librarian Mephiston as a very scary, very mobile close combat threat. He'll be using Wings of Sanguinius and Quickening to get right up to the enemy, again with a potential for a first turn charge. We then have 13 Death Company, 5 of whom have Power Fists, the rest all have Chain Swords, and they all have Bolters. And then we have a similar very hard-hitting unit of Sanguinary Guard, with 10 of them with 5 swords and 5 Power Fists in the unit. Both of these are just incredibly hard-hitting combat units that should have a decent chance of obliterating virtually whatever they touch, particularly if we choose to make them fight twice. One of these units will likely start on the board and think about doing a first turn charge with On Wings of Fire, and the other will start in the skies to come down on turn 2, hopefully when that screen is cleared and the enemy lines are overrun with Deathwatch. The Martyrs is there to potentially start on the board and give a +2 to charge, or you could even just drop straight in with the Deathwatch, where he provides great buffs for them, including reroll charges. To round out the Blood Angels battalion, we have 3 squads of 5 scouts who will be holding up in the midfield, trying to screen any of the characters such as Mephiston and the Watch Captain, and potentially capture some objectives, or even add their weight of fire to the initial huge alpha strike. I think another reason that the Blood Angels and Deathwatch have good synergy is that neither of the chapters really need their unique doctrine all that much. The Deathwatch don't even have one, and the Blood Angels don't get to theirs until turn 3, which by then it might be a little bit late anyway. I feel that this could be an army that is quite prone to going first or second, just because if the enemy spreads out with a load of chaff screening units and you can't drop anywhere nearby, then that could cause a problem for getting to the core of their army. Also, if the enemy does manage to weather the initial alpha strike, then you have quite a lot of very expensive units out in the open, and they could well get cut down. But it really is quite a big alpha strike, with 2 massive Blood Angels combat threats, and a crazy amount of special issue ammo Storm Voltifier coming down straight from turn 1. So hopefully we will be able to do some key damage to the enemy army. We also don't have any units to secure our home objectives, so we will be very dependent on actually destroying the enemy army to win the game. Finally, I thought we'd take a look at a bit more of a balanced Deathwatch army list, perhaps a little bit more similar to what people might actually own for Deathwatch. This one's an entirely pure Deathwatch list. Again, we've got the Watchmaster and Watch Captain with Thunderhammer and Jump Pack set up with the exact same traits in the previous one. Our aim for starting on the board will be the 2 squads of standard veterans with Storm Bolters and Storm Shields and 3 Terminators to tank light anti-infantry firepower, and the Bark and Vanguard veteran to allow them to jump in and out of combat at will. They're reasonably tanky and would generally be aiming to start just out of line of sight but fairly close to the front of the deployment zone and advance into the midfield. In Deep Strike, we'll be aiming to use 2 big squads of Primaris Deathwatch. Here we've got 5 Intercessors with auto bolt rifles, 4 Aggressors for some melee punch, and 1 Inceptor. These guys will make an absolute mess of any infantry targets, particularly in tactical doctrine, and having 4 Aggressors as an Inceptor means that the entire kill team will be toughness 5, so just that little bit harder to remove. The Aggressors also let them advance and shoot all of their assault weapons at no penalty, so they can actually be relatively mobile comparatively for infantry, even once they have dropped down and are on the board. I could have been quite happy to switch these guys out for just full squads of Intercessors as well, and perhaps get some stratagems on the go for the bolt rifles. We've got a couple of units of Intercessors with the Stalker bolt rifles to capture home objectives. They'll literally just be sitting there, securing the flanks, and plinking away with damage to bolt guns. Finally, we have a very focused anti-tank element for the army in 3 Dreadnoughts with quad las cannons. The Contemptor Mortises are just very efficient point for point, and they do mean that we have a reasonable chance of knocking out some key enemy armour, at least early in the game. I think advantages to this list are, as always with Deathwatch, very decent anti-infantry firepower, and a little bit more board control than some of the previous lists that we've talked about. We actually do have some units for holding home objectives, and then we've got 40 models of pretty tanky marines to hold the midfield. It's good to have a reasonable amount of anti-armour, but I do worry that it's all slightly concentrated in just 3 Dreadnoughts, and if the opponent focuses them down early, then we lose pretty much all our capacity to deal efficient damage to tanks, and we wouldn't have much option besides mass special issue ammunition, or Thunderhammers or Aggressors in close combat. I feel that Deathwatch perhaps aren't quite as incredibly durable as some of the other top armies out there at the moment, and they kind of have to make that up with just hitting really, really hard. So I hope you've enjoyed a few Deathwatch list ideas there. I'm not saying that they're enormously super optimized or anything, they're more to try and demonstrate a few different concepts and just have a mess around with ideas. That being said, if you can see any obvious improvements, it will be interesting to hear them, or if you have any other builds that have worked really well for you. If you've been enjoying the videos, feel free to subscribe to more from Auspex Tactics. We have regular 40k stuff coming out every single day, so feel free to subscribe for more similar stuff. If you have been enjoying the videos recently, then any support on Patreon is greatly appreciated. It is what keeps the channel going, as it allows me to dedicate more of my time to making YouTube videos. As well as helping keep the videos coming, you also get the chance to see some videos early, get to vote in polls for what's coming next on the channel, and there's the occasional prize draw where I post out some miniatures to one Patreon. If any of that interests you, or you'd just like to help support creation of more videos, then the link is in the description below. And of course a massive thank you to my current Patreons for making all the videos possible. In any case, a massive thank you for listening. I'll hope to see you guys next time.